Hey guys, welcome back to Community Starcraft 2. If you're here, you're probably wondering what in the world is going on with PvP nowadays. And guess what? I've got a lot of really good information for you here in this video. As you can see, we're going to go over some build orders, some army compositions, some timings, all that good stuff that you see on the screen there, and PvP definitely is a matchup where things can get quite weird. So, what better way to teach you about PvP than to look at some really weird games from some really good players? Let's just go ahead and jump into the game, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about here. So, basically what we do in these replays is we go through each game, or rather each matchup, and I'll show you a few replays and I'll explain to you guys what's going on. Since this is a PvP, we'll have the benefit of looking at this from two different sides. So, our players this game are Min Chol, which is better known as MC, probably the best Protoss of all time in StarCraft 2, and he's fighting Wellmew, who is a very good... I can't remember if he is Finnish. I'm pretty sure he's from Finland. But anyway, so PvP. Let's take a look at the openers from these guys. This is going to be really common. Gateway is going to come down. You're going to go scout with with the worker that puts the gateway down. Right after that, you're going to take 2 gases. This is really normal for PvP, and I'll explain these gas timings for you really quickly. If you take the 2 gases, you can fill them up with 2 out of 3 right away on both, and you can see that one player does it and one player doesn't. 2 out of 3 is generally going to be for a little milder tech timings. So you usually will go for maybe more gateway units and less tech right away. And 3 out of 3 typically means you're going to be a lot safer with Mothership Core, Stalker probably. And tech can be around the same lines. So the only trade-off is that you usually won't make as many gateway units with a faster double gas mining from both. Now if you want to just take 1 gas, that's going to be only for specific situations. That'll be if you want to do some type of early gateway rush or some type of early expand build, but even a lot of the early expand builds still go 2 out of 3 on each gas and keep it that way. So bear in mind what kind of openers you want to run in PvP and match up your gas timings so that it makes sense. Obviously core right afterward, that should go without saying pretty much. There's no reason to ever go for anything other than a core. Unless you're playing PvZ and doing a really weird gateway expand, but I guess if you're doing a forge expand, but even still your core would come out right after the gateway. So you can see from both of these guys, MC's opting to get a stalker. As we can see, we expected this to happen, considering he did have less gas mining early on. So he goes ahead and grabs a stalker, and it looks like a Twilight Council is on the way for Wellmew. So you can see that coming down right here. So he opted for the faster tech without the gateway unit. MC opted for the gateway unit, and then tech right afterwards. So that's kind of how those gas timings all line up. But basically, you're going to have a decision. Once your core is done, you're going to decide, okay, do I get a Mothership Core right away or not? That's going to basically determine how safe you want to be in this matchup. Obviously, a faster Mothership Core is going to mean that you're going to have a lot better defensives. A lot of builds will rely on the Mothership Core, and you can actually see that Wellmew canceled that Twilight Council after scouting something unusual. I'm not really sure what he saw. Maybe he just saw the earlier unit out of MC, didn't know exactly what that meant, decided to cancel it. Interestingly enough, though, MC decides to go Twilight Council. So, back to what I was saying here, though, is that if you look at the tech trees for Protoss, once your core comes down, you have basically 3 options. And I'm going to actually include a 4th as well. Your 4th option can be just to attack with a lot of gateway units and try to kill them. But that's a lot more unreliable. Even still, with those type of plays, you'll try to pressure him, you'll try to do what you can, but if you can't kill him, which most of the time you won't be able to, you're going to have some sort of tech behind it. So MC went into his menu here, and he decided, okay, I'm going to go Twilight Council this game. And apparently Wellmew did that too, but decided to cancel it. And you can see him even chrono boosting units out here. I think he's really worried about some sort of attack, or actually I think this probe's going down to expand. So yeah, so we'll continue on here. I'll explain the builds as they develop. But MC opting to go Twilight Council, and that's going to obviously open up either DTs or Blink. And yeah, Wellmew does just go ahead and drop the expansion here. So every single time you go for a really fast expand, you can even see MC sacrificing the Stalker just to try to get some information here. And the information that he has is really valuable. He knows that there's a Nexus up right now, and he can figure that almost always if you drop a Nexus this fast, the Robo is going to be right afterward. The reason being is because DT builds are definitely a threat, and they're definitely good in this matchup. So you need to have some answer for those, whether that's the detection on the Oracle or the detection out of a Robo. So almost every single one of these really fast Nexus openers is going to follow up with a Robo, And I'm sure MC, even without seeing that, which I'm pretty sure he didn't, yeah, he doesn't know it's there visually, but he knows with the Nexus timing there's got to be a robo there. So I don't know what I'm doing here, but so yeah, that's basically what's going on here. Now you need to think about, if you're running a build, how is my build going to match up against my opponent? So MC configure, he knows there's a Nexus down. As you can see, his Stalker's still just being a little bit annoying there, trying to see what he can get. And of course the Stalker's so fast that there's really no commitment here, you can just walk away with it. But MC's build is that of a DT, obviously. And he knows that since this is such a fast Nexus, there's almost guaranteed going to be a robo. And the Observer, as we can see, is already out. And you can figure that if you have any sort of window with your DTs at all, it's going to be a tiny window, so you got to be really careful with them. So he just walks in here, and we can see that the two texts basically determine that MC needs to be careful, and or rather MC is being aggressive and Whelmy needs to be careful. Now, he did try to get that DT, didn't quite get it, no big deal here. Let's just press forward in the game here as these little skirmishes are going on. But basically, that matched up so that neither player basically did anything. And of course with MCs, if you see your opponent expand, then you know you're basically fine to expand. Almost unconditionally. So that's one big thing in PvP, is because either you decide to take an expansion, you play a more safe route with the sentries, with the Observer, stuff like that into Immortal, or you just say, I'm going to play based upon what you do, which is what MC is doing. So I'm starting to realize this is getting a little bit confusing because we're watching two different Protosses and trying to explain their strategy here, but the most important thing about PvP is that you guys both play the same race, obviously, and you need to know what your opponent is doing all the time so you can react with the appropriate reactions. Now, obviously, you're going to be really frustrated in a lot of games where if you both try for the same strategy and they just match up with each other really annoyingly, you can get into some really weird games like that, and that'll basically come down to execution and some decision making. But these builds are fairly autonomous here, at least as far as matching up against one another, because they're so common. So, after that, you need to decide a couple of things. Once your opener's ran its course, once you've taken your natural and you start mining from the gases down there, you need to decide, alright, well, what's my mid-game play? And the mid-game play can be, again, one of two or three things. The most common is going to be Colossus, considering they're going to win most of the time if you just get good positioning with your army. And you kind of need to base this decision around the map. So if you look at this map, there's chokes here, there's just chokes everywhere that you can get good attacks with your Colossus. Even the widest points are really not that wide. Like 5 or 6 Colossus could hit this entire thing at once. So the Colossus for being the choice on this map, for both these players actually, as we can see Whelmy is already producing one, it makes a lot of sense. So we're going to get into a Colossus versus Colossus game, and you want to start supplementing things with things like Blink, just to move your Stalkers around. Sometimes you can be a little bit harassment heavy, and that's kind of what MC's build is. Typically any DT opener will go into some type of harassment, whether that's a Warp Prism drop, dropping the DTs in the opponent's base, or that's Blink or something like that. Very rarely into Stargate. The more you play, the more you figure out what the transitions are. And really, if you're wondering a lot about PvP on a really intimate level, I would suggest watching a lot of pro games to figure that out. So the other option you can go for is something like Immortal Archon with some good upgrades. So there are some like double forage Immortal Archon builds that you can run that are pretty good. They'll have an upgrade advantage in pretty much the whole game, and you really need surface area with those kinds of builds. We'll see that a little bit later though, in a different replay. So you can see MC still being out on the map with his DTs a little bit, and his composition is starting to refine itself. Now as the game goes on, you typically want less and less Stalkers, just because Zealots, Immortals, basically everything will deal with Stalkers just fine. So you want to be careful, and if you're going to do a high Stalker count like this, you need to absolutely do some damage with it. So we can see here comes the harassment options out of MC. He's going to load up his DTs into the Warp Prism, going to get some Stalkers over here, and what he's going to try to do is he's going to try to rely on the fact that there's only one Observer out for Whelmy right now. So what he's doing, he's bringing his own Observer as well, and he's bringing the DTs so that if he can ever snipe the Observer of Whelmy, these DTs are totally unchecked. Now Whelmy, being the smart player, kind of realizes that he already has a cannon up here and a cannon up there so that his mineral lines are protected in case that event happens. So you can see both of these players making the right reactions based upon what's going on. And really one safe thing to say is that if you're ever going against DTs, no matter what the situation is, just put cannon in your mineral line. There's no reason not to, because if that ever gets out of control, you could just lose the game to something really silly. So as we can see, MC blinks up here. He's just going to try to pick off what he can. Observer is now coming in, and I think he actually knows that there's a cannon there. Yes. So he knows that the DTs are basically not going to do what they want to do over here. So this was kind of shut down pretty well by Willie. I've got to really hand it to him and say that he played this out really correctly. Now all of a sudden we have to say Whelmy is probably in the lead because there's a lot of Stalkers out for MC, and Stalkers really don't do that much in the later stages of the game. The Colossus count, if we can just check out the units tab, it's 3-to-1, and that's a really big deal in Colossus versus Colossus. And a lot of times you'll also see double Robo Colossus, even on 2 base, just to get as many of them out as humanly possible. The issues you can run into here is that if you have a lot of Colossus and not a lot of anti-air, which you can see there's only 3 sentries here, if your opponent's doing something like Void Rays or Tempest or something like that, you're going to really have a hell of a time trying to deal with that. So keep that in mind and be prepared to deal with those types of transitions and stop Colossus production if there's no reason to make them anymore. And of course, the biggest tool of all in this matchup is Hallucination. That's a free scout. Always make at least 2 sentries and keep them somewhere so you can continually scout your opponent and figure out what's going on. There's really no reason not to have that information. So I realize we're moving on just a little bit slow here. We're going to speed this up just a tad and try to catch up because I don't want to make this go for too long, as we do have 2 more games to go on here. Now the good thing about these Blink Stalkers is that if you control them correctly, you really don't ever have to commit to them into a fight unless your opponent is trying to fight you. So if you want to be annoying, try to pick off some pylons or something, you can do that. So here we go. Whelmy's decided, okay, I've seen your army enough times, I know that I have the Colossus advantage right now. The Colossus advantage is 4-to-2. And you might look at the supplies and think, yeah, Whelmy definitely has a lead here. You still need to be a little bit careful if you're Whelmy, but if you ever match up in the sense that you're both doing the same tech, you both have basically the same upgrades, Whelmy's actually going to be an upgrade ahead here in just a second. You have to decide that if you're ever in a point where you have an advantage here, you need to press that advantage. You can't just stand around and let them catch up if you realize that you have that. So in this case, having double the Colossus count is a huge deal, as these Zealots are going to get fried by the Colossus. Again, the Stalkers won't do much as the game goes on, so the army for Whelmy is really, really strong. I should also mention the different little supplements you need to throw in there. Archons are going to be really good to hold the front line because they can take a ton of damage against the Colossus of your opponent, and they can also wipe out Zealots really fast so that you can kind of blow through their front lines. Now MC, let's pretend we're MC here for a second. You have a superior army barreling down on you. There's 4 Colossus. Archons, not that many Zealots, and they don't matter because they're just going to die anyway in the fight. What do you do? What do you do about this? You can't just do nothing. So you have to do a couple of things. One, you can try and be cute and snipe the Observer of Milumnius, considering he still only has 1 with his army. So if you get that and you can just kill him with DTs, or at least push his army away with DTs, you can at least buy some time, maybe get some more Colossus out. Or you can do this. He's going to just drop into the main and try to base trade, or at least try to hold out against Whelmy long enough to make this worth it. So Whelmy has to make a decision here. Whelmy sees this coming in, everything gets dropped off, these Stalkers are going to basically die for nothing. A massive warp in here basically means that MC is committed. Now all MC has to do is hold this attack, and he'll be fine. So I guess we'll just wait and see if he can actually hold against this being 2 Colossus down. And the hallucinated Colossus is really smart out of MC. I don't know what the deal is with that. But here comes a fight, and we can see that the 4 Colossus from MC are just absolutely raining down damage. And there's really just not much here left for MC anymore. Yeah, he's getting a lot done here in the main, and that's great, but if you lose the fight, and there's still 4 Colossus on the field, which we can see that these Colossus are frying up pretty much everything, you're going to be pretty much fine, and this is really hard to stop. So there's my phone going off once again, of course. Yeah, so basically Whelmy decided that he had an advantage. They were both running the same unit composition, and once he realized that advantage, he decided to push it, noticing that he had the upgrade lead and that he had the Colossus count lead. So there's a big deal here, and we can see that MC is really running out of options as these 4 Colossus are still virtually untouched. So he's just barreling through here, doing a great job, and yeah, that'll pretty much end this game. GG. So yeah. So I guess the thing to take away from the first game is that if you ever see yourself in some sort of advantage, and the advantage is definitely, you know, tangible and it's foreseeable enough, you need to press that. You can't just stand around and wait for your opponent to catch up. Otherwise, what's the point of getting that advantage in the first place? That's especially true in mirror matchups, and especially true in PvP, and especially true when you're both using the exact same unit composition and you have a lead in that. So, next game we're going to watch is Gemini versus In Control. In Control, buddy of mine. We casted an event recently, so that was kind of cool, but he also still does play, and he plays at a very high level, and he tends to get in some really weird games, so this will be a good teaching tool for us once again. And then when we're watching these games, we don't really need to see that much. We can actually just slow it down, wait for these double gas timings. You can see 14 gas here for Gemini. Is he going to take a second gas? Yes. So these are very aggressive gases. And it looks like In Control's on a very similar pace. So both these guys getting really aggressive gases. We'll have to see what this means as time goes on. We're just going to see 3 out of 3 in one, and yeah, 3 out of 3 in the other. And it looks like In Control's just going 2 out of 3. So remember what we said, 2 out of 3 in each gas. Let's say you come in here and you scout this. If it's just 2 out of 3 in each gas, you know there's going to probably be a faster gateway unit out. There could be some earlier aggression. And if you're In Control, if you scout 3 out of 3 in each gas right off the bat, you have to think that's some kind of faster tech play. So you have to kind of gauge and you know, determine your responses based upon what you're seeing early on in this game. And you can kind of jump to conclusions. But let's continue to move on here. Now once again, the core is finishing up here. This is typically when you would decide what kind of tech you want to drop. And usually, if you're going to go tech heavy, you might as well add on the mothership core, because look at the resources for him. You can afford a mothership core, and just a couple seconds later you can afford something like a Twilight Council. I would say I should also amend myself and just make a general recommendation that if you are opening up with an earlier tech, typically Robo is the worst opener overall unless you open up with an expansion before Robo. So I would say Stargate and Twilight Council are very, very fine to go before Nexus and try to be aggressive with it. But here comes the scout here out of In Control, and we can see he actually just drops the Stargate. So let's see what In Control... I mean, In Control knows about this. You can see with his workers walking in here, he knows this is a Stargate. He can just easily click on it and see what it is. He's going to stick around for as long as possible, and In Control drops a pylon here. This is really intelligent, just to make sure that the Stargate actually finishes. So he's spending an extra 100 minerals just to be sure this is actually operational. And the other interesting thing you can see is that this is kind of just a general tip. Here, let me get a better freeze frame here. Okay, here we go. You can kind of see that, but if you can see inside the Stargate, you can actually see what unit it's producing. And you can see, if you know the unit outlines, you can see that's a Phoenix. So he doesn't worry about anything like oracles or void ray or something like that. He knows exactly what this is because he has this pylon here. Back at home, he decided to get the 2 out of 2 in each gas for a little while. We'll notice he has a mothership core out. He's a second stalker on the way, and he's rallying up to his first stalker, and he's blocking the Nexus here. So this all signifies some type of aggression out of In Control, and we'll have to see what that is. Now this is one of the 4 options I talked about. You can either take one of these tech routes that's available after core, or you can do some type of earlier gateway aggression. We'll see that what In Control is able to do with this. So typically, the best thing to do with this type of gateway aggression is to throw down 3 gates. We can see them right here. And this isn't going to be like I need to kill him with this type of attack. This is going to be like, if you mess up, you can die to this. You shouldn't, but if you mess up, you will. Now behind this, you want to think about your tech as well if you're In Control. Because if he has something else crazy, I mean, in this case, he knows exactly what it is. He knows it's Stargate. But if, let's say he doesn't know for sure, and he decides to go for some type of 3 gateway aggression. If he does this, he needs some type of follow-up tech, because if this doesn't work and your opponent has DTs, you're dead, because you have no detection and there's no way you're ever going to deal enough damage for it to matter before all your units are dead, and you will never kill the DT because you have no observer. Or, I guess, no forage, but that's kind of a more weird reaction. Anyway, so we're going to see this attack come up here. In Control is trying to be a little bit annoying. If you can kill the mothership core with a gateway aggression, then that will basically win you the game if somebody opens up with faster tech. Now, it's pretty obvious that there's some sort of aggression coming down because the Stalker's being awfully bold. So if you're Gemini here and you're kind of forced into this Stargate so far, your best option is to open up with a Void Array. And you can see that the Void Array is actually doing quite a bit. And the Phoenix is actually coming back here to try and harass the mothership core, and it gets it. So he trades 100 gas for 100 gas, the Void Array's out, and now he has a Sentry. So he's held this basically no problem. Now the ball is basically in Control's court. What's he going to do about this? We'll notice that he hasn't dropped his follow-up tech yet, mainly because there's not much of a reason for him to. I mean, it's not like he needs a detection or anything, because he knows there's a Stargate out, he knows that the tech is Void Rays right now, and In Control doing some decent micro, I guess until he uses that stalker, but the overcharge will do quite a bit against this, so that's the safety of having this mothership core, especially if you're being the teching player. You can do a lot with it. And In Control being quite brave here, this is something you can do as well. you can be a little bit annoying and just pull the Hort unit out of the range right here. If you're trying to be aggressive with this. In control, going to go ahead and drop in expansions. We can see his probe hanging out down here. There we go. And this is something else that's really interesting as well. Both of you have access to force fields. And we all know that only massive units will crush force fields. So one thing you can do if you get in a position like this, where if your opponent is just sitting in his base and he's just really scared and he can't do anything about it, you can just sit here and contain him with one sentry, have some units out here. If he tries to walk down the ramp, just force field off a couple of them so that there's no way that he'll be able to break out until he gets a massive unit. There's actually a spider crawling across my desk. That's a nice omen. Anyway, so In Control is going to run a containment here, and you can see the probe did sneak out for Gemini, so he knows there's an expansion. So he knows for sure this is just some kind of containment play. I need to find a way to break this. There's a lot of different things you can do. One thing I would like to see him do actually is to open up, or rather grab a Phoenix out of here, just lift the sentry, and then you can bust your way down and get pretty decent trades that way. So we'll see what he opts to do, and look at this, there's a Phoenix on the way. I actually haven't even watched this replay, so I promise that I'm a lot smarter than it seems. So the other interesting thing you can do, if somebody's trying to contain you like this, if you get a probe out on the map, which you should always try and put a probe out at some point, if you get a pylon in their base, all of a sudden they have to deal with warpins back at home. And this could also be a distraction tactic. So if you use this to try to distract your opponent, and then you come down here and they miss the force field, this containment did not do its job. So interesting plays here out of Gemini right now. He'll have to overcharge almost assuredly, unless he just micros his way out of this, which he definitely can. In the meantime, we're going to have to wait for that Phoenix to come down. It's almost assuredly going to lift that sentry. He's just going to walk down the ramp and break this no problem. So we'll have to wait for that to come up. Fast forward just a little bit. And he's continuing to be annoying here. He's saying, you're underreacting to this. I'm going to force you to burn that overcharge, and I'm going to stand outside of its range and still be as irritating as possible. And this is the intelligent thing. If you're ever containing somebody with a sentry, you know eventually they're going to be able to break out. Whether it's because they have Blink, or because they have a Phoenix, or a multitude of things. If they open DT, they could have an Archon and just crush it. You need to eventually decide, okay, I got my advantages. My Nexus is done. And my containment doesn't need to do anything anymore. So just drop a force field and walk away. And that's exactly what he's doing. So, I mean, we could talk about little intricacies forever. Let's kind of speed up this game a little bit, and we'll get into more strategic choices as this game goes on. I mostly am interested in seeing the reactions to this constant void ray production out of Gemini. So let's see what In Control decides to do. Let's see when he knows what's going on. So Hallucinated Scout coming in here once again. These are free if you have sentries, so there's no reason not to have 2 or 3 sentries out. I always make 2 because the energy almost refreshes enough just to give me that information. And I don't like to have extra sentries. I'd rather spend it on better tech, but everyone has their own preferences. So the Hallucination Scout coming in here, you can see he's just going to scout out to see if there's any extra buildings or anything. And then he should see this army. He should see 3 Void Rays, and that's got to be like, that's a little weird because we didn't discuss this as an option in the previous game. It is a very unusual option to go for heavy Stargate on 2 bases. But we're going to see in this game how In Control decides to respond to that. And we'll talk a little bit about that as the game progresses. So In Control, he's actually started to make Phoenix out of this. Knowing that the Void Rays are a little slower, he can probably get a few probe kills here and there. But at critical mass, and if you get the range upgrade, Phoenix will do really well against that. But he decides, okay, that's a lot of Void Rays, and I just lost a couple Phoenix. That's kind of bad. Let's make a Templar Archives. And this is very cool because you never saw this in Wings of Liberty especially, and this is a very new thing to do. And here we go. Storm is on the way, and Storm is the tech choice because as the Void Rays get higher and higher in count, they will tend to clump up. Even just look at them as they move around. The Storm can hit every single Void Ray here, and as more and more of them congregate, I don't even know what word I'm searching for, I'm just kind of derping out. But as more and more of them get together, the storms will be even more effective as time goes on. So that's a very interesting play here out of In Control. Now you don't want to overdo it with Templar either. 4 Templar is fine for the storms. They'll do their damage. Theoretically, every single one is going to do 80 damage. As you can see, the stats here on the Psionic Storm. Supplement the rest with Archons, and then start to get into a little more of a longer-term solution against this Void Ray play. Whether that's your own Stargates, whether that's a lot of Blink Stalkers or something, but you don't want to go too crazy on the Stalkers because the overcharge on the Void Rays is very, very strong against those Stalkers. So the choice of adding in Archons here is smart from Gemini, and this is something you can do. Let's pretend we're Gemini here, and we see that there's a lot of Templar sitting around with a lot of energy. You got to be thinking, okay, this has only got to mean Storm. And the cute thing here for Gemini is that if he ever has a couple of Templar out, and if you can just feed back these, all of a sudden the Storm is completely wasted investment, and Gemini has a huge advantage. So these are little things you got to think about. What does my opponent have, and what's the smartest way for me to counter it without spending too much to counter it? If you play any like trading card games or something, a big deal is how much was the card that I used to remove the card that they have. So yeah, so it's kind of the same idea in real-time strategy as well. Now the other cool thing I want to mention from In Control is that he has just total map dominance. Look at how many pylons are out on the map. He has them everywhere. And that's just so he has various warp-in points to do some harassment and stuff. And here's one cool thing you can do with this, is that if you have Storm and you land it on these probes die shockingly fast to Storms. Because they're kind of a little bigger than the other units. They have less health than SCVs. They die fast. And I think Gemini's going to realize this once he goes up here and tries to deal with that. But here we go, Storm's coming down all over the workers, and he didn't even move them, so he lost a lot there. So there's a lot of ways that Storm can be useful. That's not just for battles. You can see these guys continue to refine their unit composition, and In Control's follow-up as a choice, or man, I'm like totally not even making sense here, but In Control's longer-term choice is to start adding in Immortals, get some more Archons. We can see that there's an Immortal walking out here. He could actually just go double Immortal production. But he's also opting to add on a Robotics Bay. Just kind of getting a catch-all, maybe realizing that the Void Ray count isn't as high as he thought it was. So, again, just constant reactions to what your opponent is doing. That's the name of this matchup. Although, the actual name is PvP, but you know what I mean. So Darkstrike coming up, both of them getting up their upgrades. Upgrades are a big deal here. Let me mention that really fast, since we kind of glazed over the double forge option. If you're just going single forge, there's basically no reason not to just get ground weapons. Especially for things like Colossus, because the Colossus will deal so much damage so fast that you're going to get way more utility out of this than you would out of armor or shield upgrades. However, if you're going for something like double forge, this is kind of unusual as well. It depends on how you want to play it out. Some people like to go armor, but I personally like to go attack and shields. And the reason being is that as the game gets longer, Stargate armies start to get stronger and stronger. And if your Stargate army has +3 shields and theirs doesn't, you have a huge advantage. So keep that in mind as far as what your composition is going to transform into as the game goes on. Maybe add on a second forge and grab those shield upgrades. The armor upgrades are really just not going to be that great, only because they only benefit your ground units that will start to be expendable as the game goes on. So just keep that in mind as well. There's like no structure to this whatsoever. I'm just saying whatever comes to mind, and that's how we roll. But so here comes the two Robos out of Gemini, realizing that he's going to have to start reacting to what he sees out of In Control. And we don't know for sure what exactly he knows because we haven't been watching every little thing, but if he saw something like the Robo Bay coming up, which he didn't see, this would be a smart reaction. But this game's going to start getting a little more and more strange. And here's that idea with the Storm. Okay, never mind. He just makes me a liar and merges those. But I was going to say that if he keeps those two Templar and feeds back the Storm Templar, then that will be a really smart idea. We can see that's not actually what happened. So both the players getting Warp Prisms. We can see the one flying out of there is the second one. And at this stage of the game, once you start to approach max, then you're going to want to start refining your unit composition into things that are more useful. So if you're maxed out, and you're not really ready to fight because you're not totally comfortable about taking that fight, dump off some Zealots for some harassment. Like send some Zealots in here, and then send a second pack into here, and see if you can get his army to be split apart, maybe get some damage done, slow him down however you can, and refine your unit composition when it comes to that point. One other really important thing is the worker count in PvP. This is unlike a normal matchup where in PvT or PvZ, you'd probably want about 75 workers to sit at max. This one you can sit a lot lower because you want to have a bigger army to engage your opponent with. It's kind of weird, but you'll see that at pretty much any high-level games. They won't go too high. 72 is actually a little higher than you'll see in most games, which is what In Control has right now. Stalker's still just trying to be annoying. You can see Blink will allow them to get out of there sometimes. He gets the Warp Prism. Okay, never mind. I'm just going to say that's a big deal. Here we go. So we're going to start getting into the later game Stargate stuff. And as we can see the Fleet Beacon coming down. There's a weird circle of balance here, and you can see even In Control is doing the same thing, researching the +1 air and the +1 shields upgrades. So, yeah, this game's going to get into the weird part of PvP that can happen where both of you have a lot of Stargates, and you don't really know what to make off of those. The safest bet is Tempest plus Storm, mainly because you can zone out pretty much whatever you want with the Tempest, and if somebody's attacking into you with Storms, you're going to be in really good shape. So we'll have to see where that goes. The other thing can be is if your opponent has a ton of Tempest, you can respond to that with Void Ray as they just demolish them for cost, assuming you don't get Stormed to death. Or if your opponent has a lot of Void Rays, believe it or not, the correct answer there is Carriers. And Carriers are actually really strong in PvP, so you can get into these weird situations. Here's the fight. The angle really favors In Control right now as he has much better surface area. These kind of plays, I'd really like to see the Mothership Core come with you just in case you get into some trouble. If you are going to lose this fight, which he really definitely will if he engages here, you need to be able to just recall and go home and save your stuff. But he doesn't have his Mothership Core with him, and he's probably going to just pay out the nose with it or try to run away. And either way, he's going to lose some stuff trying to run away, and yeah, he does. So look at this choke right here. You can see them all getting funneled down. You never want to be in a choke against Colossus. That's just a death wish. And this is funny. A cannon, random cannon out here from In Control actually dealing some damage to the army as it retreats. But yeah, so both these guys getting into the weirder part of the game. Tempest being added on continually for Gemini. And the really smart thing here is that if your opponent has a lot of Colossus and you opt for not trying to match their Colossus count, you can get into about 6 or 7 Tempests. Those 6 or 7 Tempests will all shoot it. If they all shoot the same Colossus, they'll kill it in one hit. So you can do things like have the Tempest focusing the Colossus down while the rest of your army runs away to not take damage from the Colossus and then re-engage when that happens. But you're still vulnerable because if you get hit with only 3 Tempests, then all of a sudden the Colossus are going to do way more damage than they're supposed to. So we'll see if he's able to turn that corner. Stargate count's going to start getting silly for these guys. You can see that In Control's already at 3 and adding 2 more on. So this is going to be a pretty wild game. Check the timer on this. It's so insanely long game. 12 more minutes. Alright, so I think we talked about most of what we need to talk about, but I kind of want to show the final fight of this, just so we can see the compositions in action here. The Tempest starting to get some shots off, but they're not hitting what they need to. They really need to hit these Colossus, and frankly, trading Colossus for Tempest is totally worth it, considering the remainder of your army should be better than the remainder of his. Observer gets wasted. But, okay, let's talk about another thing here. One thing that happens, especially in PvP, is that whoever has the more expansions for longer, this is kind of an obvious fact, but if you get into a point where you have to trade your armies, and you both come out even, look at the army that In Control can replace with because of the money that he has, and look at the army that his opponent can replace with, these should both effectively be 0 because he's still behind in supply. And only because he had a better economy, it even comes back to storming down these probes. Only because he had a better economy, he's going to have way better refill potential as the game continues on. So, pretty scary army coming down here from Gemini. In Control, really no response. He realizes that he probably won't win that fight, so he just gives it up. The other interesting thing you can think about with your Tempest is that if I can get his army all kind of clumped up over here and having to walk through this choke, and my Tempests are right here, then my Tempest will get free shots without taking any damage. So you need to think about how you can be creative with the map architecture in order to favor you. And look how hilarious this is. 5 Tempests on the way at a time out of In Control. He realizes what's going on here, and he realizes that if his Colossus go down, his ground army is really bad. It'll lose to the remainder of Gemini's army. So if he can just snipe down his opponent's Tempests, then he'll be in good shape. But that's easier said than done, so we'll have to see. Here's another really interesting thing that I just saw come out of him. Yes, the Oracle being added on in the late game is really important if you have a lot of Tempests, because then you can use their spotting with this Revelation that gives the Tempest a lot more vision. So you can see the range for the Tempest extends out to here, but in reality the Tempest by itself can only see to about here. And the extra 1 or 2 range with an Observer or Hallucination, or in this case the best option is the Revelation on the Oracle, you're going to get really favorable engagements if you can see your opponent and they can't see you. So, once again, stating the obvious. But, so the composition's coming down here as it gets further along into the Tempest count. You have to say Gemini was favored, but the fact that In Control has 5 Stargates, he can just pour out this Tempest, really means that he's going to start to get more and more of an advantage. Now, let's hypothetically say that Gemini realizes that there's Tempest coming out 5 at a time. If you realize that, he would actually need to just switch his army supply completely into Void Ray to deal with this army, and get those couple of Templar just to feed back his Storm Templar so that they can't land storms on you. If that were the case, the Void Rays just blow through this army no problem. But that's again the importance of knowing what your opponent is doing and trying to counter it. I realize this video is extremely long, but PvP is a very intricate matchup, and this is going to be a little longer than most of ours. Okay, he tagged him with the Oracle, so he knows everything that's going on. You can see he has vision on his army. He, being Gemini, having vision on the Control's army. And this is something you can do that's cute as well. If you have leftover Sentry energy, you can kind of try and fake him out, try to bait some false Tempest shot here on a Hallucinated Colossus. You can see one just ate a shot. He's actually focusing the Archon stand, which is not a bad idea, so the Void Rays can engage. But I guess here we go. This should be the biggest fight of the game, or rather the final fight, I would assume. Pretty rare to see these big armies kind of break even, so it's going to come down to decision making here, and it's mostly going to come down to what Tempests are able to hit on each side. So continuing on, I guess there wasn't a fight. We're going to have to wait for a little bit. We already know the game's going to end in just a few minutes anyway, so there's got to be something. I would hate to make you guys just sit here and watch nothing, and there's not much left for me to say about this game. So let's just review a couple of things about the other games while we're waiting for this fight to build up. Actually, here we go. So the biggest problem here for Gemini is he's eating a ton of storms. Like we were talking about, those Templar all got their storms off. All of a sudden in Control's army, it should be a lot better in this circumstance, especially since you can kind of reinforce over these Tempests with the Stalkers that you can work in. Tempests are still shooting Colossus, but if you are shooting your opponent's Tempest with your own Tempest, you're in good shape. And you can see him trying to reinforce over these. This game is really, really strange. Look at the mirror compositions coming down here. But either way, In Control has a better economy. He got a better unit composition, he got a better engagement. He should just flat out win this fight, and you can see him starting to push him back here. Okay, I'm just going to stop here. I think that's enough for this replay, and we really need to get to the last one as well before this goes on to be like an hour-long video. But so basically we've seen the gambit of different openers. We've seen a DT into Blink opener, we've seen a Robo opener after an expansion, we've seen a Stargate opener against a Gateway attack. So we've seen basically everything. All four options that we were talking about you can open up with. This one's going to be really strange, and this is going to be something that I want to get into a little more, and that is if you both open with the same opener against one another. Thus far, we've seen totally different openers against one another, but just to spoil it for you a little bit, these guys both open with Stargate, and that can prove for a really, really weird game. Namely because if you open Stargate versus Stargate, and if you ever lose a Phoenix battle, Phoenix versus Phoenix, you're dead. And if it's Stargate versus Stargate, you have to go Phoenixes. You can't do anything else. It makes for a really weird game. I guess you kind of can do something else if you do get enough Stalkers out and you expand early enough, but that's a really hard corner to turn. And ultimately, if you just get an advantage in the Phoenix number fight, or upgrades or something like that, like +1 air, or even the Phoenix range upgrade, and you win the Phoenix versus Phoenix fight, the game's basically over. So that's the kind of game we're going to see here, and the point I want to make with this is that if you know that you're both doing the same opener, you need to know the little intricate transitions as far as what you need to decide on. So here's a Phoenix opening up here for Bones, and I'm sorry to not mention these guys, it's Picasso versus Bones, both very good players of course. The hallucination is just to try and throw them off a little bit, but both these guys going Phoenix here, and I'm not sure what each of them knows, and this is a really strange position to be in, because if you go and try to attack your opponent at his base and he has more Phoenix, then you're dead. So, I guess back to the overall point here. If you know your opponent is doing the exact same build that you are, you either need to try and outdo them at that build, or you need to try and find a transition that's going to help you win. The transition that would try and help you win in this circumstance is to get Blink, and just make like only Stalkers for the longest amount of time, and try to hit a timing where his Phoenix just won't be that useful in the fight. If it's like DT versus DT, a lot of times the transition is to go into Colossus, hoping that they're going to stay on Immortal Archon, or you can continue to scout and kind of change your transitions based upon what you see. Or if it's something like Blink versus Blink, it's typically coming down to whoever has the more Immortals. There's not a very smooth transition out of that battle terribly often. This is weird. Hallucinated Stalkers. But we can see, now here come down the weird transitions. Both of them decided, okay, well I know if I lose a Phoenix battle then I'm dead, so I'm just going to add a second Stargate and keep pumping out Phoenix. So they both have the exact same idea. At this point, if one of them were to decide, especially Picasso since he has the money, if he were to decide to get the range upgrade on the Phoenix and he were able to get a fight where he had range and the opponent didn't, and he could micro that correctly, then he just flat out wins. The same thing goes if one of them gets +1 air, +1 shields, +1 armor on the Phoenix, something like that. They get a good fight and the game's over. But yeah, this is one of the situations that you can get yourself in. And I'm going to throw my own personal opinion here and say that Stargate versus Stargate is the least pleasant mirror opener. It's really frustrating because losing one Phoenix fight can come down to, like if it's 10 Phoenix versus 9, the person with 10 might win the fight 5-0. And that's really annoying. And just doing math, you would say, well, he should win, 1-0. But no, the Phoenix scales so alarmingly, and it's just such a weird fight that if one player has even the slightest advantage, it spirals completely out of control. DT versus DT is probably the most elegant of the two mirror openers, and that's the reason I open DTs, because I hate getting into these kind of games where one tiny little decision can win or lose the game. And here we go, the fleet beacon on the way. Whoops, for Picasso, as we were talking about before. See if he has a window with the range, and he's also getting +1, so he's doing the smarter thing out of these two guys. And the funny thing is that, look at the unit counts. There's 10 Phoenix to 11, and the other units on the field are 1 Stalker, 2 Sentries, and a Mothership Core for Bones, and only 3 Stalkers for Picasso. So, quite literally, make only Phoenix and try to find a way to get an advantage if you come into this situation. The other mirrors are something like really early expand, Robo versus Robo. That's typically going to degenerate into Colossus versus Colossus. I, again, don't really like having mirror unit compositions fighting one another. Here we go. Okay, this was really, really intelligent out here out of Bones, because the Guardian Shield on the Sentry is going to make it so that all these Phoenix take 2 less damage for every shot that's shot by these Phoenix, and the Phoenix fire twice, and there's only 8 points of damage coming out. That's a big difference as well. So you can be creative with things like the Guardian Shield on the Sentry to try and win a fight. Here comes the Phoenix range coming down here out of Picasso. But all these little intricate decisions are going to totally change the game, and eventually we're just going to see one fight where one player wins overwhelmingly with Phoenix and ends the game. The other mirrors that you can get into are like Gateway versus Gateway openers, where you're both trying to be aggressive with Gateways. And that's going to come down to microing just a handful of units there. The obvious response is if you see that coming, you can get like a Sentry and try to force field your ramp to try and cut up your opponent's armies and try to attack you. The other thing could be like something like Blink versus Blink, which I think we already talked about. There's really no elegant way to transition out of that. You just basically need to get a better fight than your opponent and blink better. Yeah, so you can see it's pretty frustrating, but overall, if you hate situations like this where you both have the exact same unit compositions and it's hard to even tell who's ahead, open DTs. Open with a DT expand build, and that has the most transition options, and DT versus DT can turn into pretty much anything. It can turn into a Mortal Archon versus Mortal Archon. One person go Colossus, one person can very strangely switch into Stargate, which is actually not a terrible response, because they're not going to have many Stalkers on the field. But you can see both these guys pulling their sentries forward. The range is done for Picasso. Did Bones ever get range? Yes, he did, but the +1 upgrade does favor Picasso right now. So let's take a look at the unit counts. 21 to 17. If Picasso fights right now, he should win, assuming he has Guardian Shield up. You can see he's just trying to pick off one Phoenix at a time, doing really well so far, and he's forcing the overcharge here. Bones is kind of backed into a corner, and because of this, Picasso can take basically whatever base he wants. So, again, we're just going to proceed on here. We're eventually going to see a fight where the Phoenix versus Phoenix just grows out of control. You can see this game goes a lot longer. And you know what? Just take my word for it that a Phoenix versus Phoenix fight eventually happens. I don't know what else to say because this video has ran really long. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you have a better idea of how PvP operates. I only said about a fraction of what needs to be said about this matchup. There's really a ton that you need to know, but the most important thing is that you know how to react based upon the opener that you choose to run. So if I were you, I would choose an opener in PvP. Just choose one, and then learn all the different reactions that you need to make against what your opponent can do. Once you know that, you should have pretty good success in this matchup. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Leave any comments down below if you have any questions or something like that. It's usually people that watch these videos are good about answering those, or I will answer them from time to time, assuming I'm not wasting all my time doing something very unwise like not bringing water for whenever I talk. But anyway, so yeah, check out our sponsor down there, se2replaystats.com. They have a lot of really cool resources you guys can check out to analyze your own replays and get data on how you play and stuff like that. In the meantime, I'm not sure what's going to come after the strategy section now that we're finished up with this for Protoss, so I guess stay tuned and there'll be a surprise waiting for you, so take care.